curiosity, by show of hands, how many people are portrait photographers in the audience tonight? Yep. Oh my God, like some of you. Wow, okay. Well, not a lot though. Myself included there, so that's kind of fun. Now the real question is, why would a portrait photographer come to a conference about print and e-publishing? They wouldn't, right? Well, maybe two. Maybe three people total would. So that's nice. But most of them wouldn't, not in a million years, because the truth is that even though a lot of photographers have the entire creative suite, which includes InDesign, most of them have no idea what it is, have never opened it, and certainly wouldn't know how to use it or even what they would use it for. But the one thing that they do know very well is Photoshop. And they love it, right? Like, photographers do everything in Photoshop. In fact, I heard a joke once that photographers would even balance their checkbooks in Photoshop. And I'm sure that there are some who have actually tried that. So it turns out that photographers can limp along pretty decently with just Photoshop for a while until some client gets the crazy idea that they want like a photo album or something, maybe even a wedding album. And then photographers realize they are now in trouble. Because ever since they entered the industry, they've been hit over the head with Photoshop, Photoshop, Photoshop. So much so that to them, it's not just one of many great tools. It's like one of the only tools. And that's a problem because Photoshop doesn't do multi-page layouts, and it doesn't have a links panel to manage all of their placed images. But that doesn't stop them. Because the one thing that Photoshop has above everything else is familiarity, right? And photographers are also business owners. So they're really busy shooting and editing, yes, but also running a business and doing their marketing and dealing with customers and theoretically doing things like accounting. And if there's one thing that they hate as much as accounting, it would be learning new software. So they make Photoshop work, and they actually design things like 40-page wedding albums in Photoshop. Like in several PSDs, which they have to rebuild from scratch every time they need to make an edit or when it comes time to retouch them. And they quickly realize that it sucks, but they don't realize that what they're spending a week doing in Photoshop, they could do in an hour in InDesign. They don't know that. So instead of switching to InDesign, they spend more money and more time on third-party Photoshop plugins that try to make Photoshop slightly less awful in things like album design. But sadly, it's not just album design that photographers are doing in Photoshop. They're also designing all of their marketing materials, including their little pricing info guides and even contracts that you can imagine. And even, I wish I was kidding, product catalogs in Photoshop, right? So just to give you an idea how bad it is, I was teaching InDesign at a photo conference, and someone at the end of the class asked the question, so when we're done doing the design in InDesign, how do we export the layered PSD back to Photoshop? And I said, you just don't. You don't do that, right? So the other thing is, whatever they can't get done in Photoshop, they have no shame about trying to do in Microsoft Word. So you can imagine. Now obviously this workflow is very painful, and it's causing photographers to burn out in record numbers in record time, and their work-life balance is suffering as much as their passion for a craft that they used to love. It's like their love of Photoshop has completely blinded them. And I've spent the last 5 years teaching InDesign to photographers on 2 continents. I've written blog posts and tutorials and videos. I made downloadable templates and all kinds of different things. And I'm currently working on my 2nd book with PePcon Press. Woo! Very exciting. And this one is entirely dedicated to InDesign, specifically for photographers. Now here's where you come in, because there are a lot of photographers, right? Like, they're everywhere. So even in this room, there's a couple others. And chances are that you know some photographers, and that you're probably friends with some photographers, which means you have a lot of influence. And you could be the person who finally reaches them and convinces them to join the InDesign party wagon and to see the light, finally. And you can really save them from what is very much a nightmare. So the next time that you are talking to a photographer, ask them what they use for their design software. And then try really hard not to laugh. And just gently nudge them towards InDesign. And maybe take a few minutes and show them some basics. And then if all else fails,
you can just let them know my book will be out in August. Thanks.